Raise your hand if you've ever heard of the Sloan Conference. Chances are, if you're watching this, you have. And if you haven't, you've already felt its impact. For the last 20 years, the Sloan Conference has been ground zero for the most innovative ideas in sports. It's how we went from Barry Bonds hitting third to Shohei Ohtani hitting leadoff.
Ohtani, a home run!
It's how we went from Kobe thriving in the mid-range to the Ant-Man pulling up from three.
Cash!
And it's how we went from John Madden ripping the Patriots for their decision not to play for overtime in Super Bowl 36.
I think that the Patriots, with this field position, you have to just run the clock out.
To every dang team in the NFL going for it on fourth down.
Touchdown, Philadelphia!
This is a story about how a small conference started by two friends at MIT became one of the most important events on the whole sports calendar. It created career paths that just didn't exist before, and it changed the very way that pro sports teams are run. Just ask my boss, Bill Simmons.
It was like the Star Trek convention crossed with some really fascinating sports stuff. And I was like, what is this? I gotta figure out how to describe this. So I came up with Dorkapalooza.
For one weekend every year, Dorkapalooza turns quants into nerdy celebrities. And I should know, I'm one of them. This conference has been really important to me. It changed the trajectory of my career. We'll get to that later, but for now we have to start with this. The conference was started by two friends, Daryl Morey and Jessica Gelman.
That yin-yang of how Daryl and I kind of see things differently but really complement each other is what makes really some of the beauty and fun of the conference.
I fit every nerd stereotype. I like table tennis, I like chess, I like video games.
That's Daryl. He's currently the president of basketball operations for the Philadelphia 76ers. And he's done more than just about anybody to bring analytics into the NBA. But you might know him better by the nickname that Bill Simmons gave him back in 2009, Dork Elvis. In this video, we're gonna talk to Dork Elvis, Jessica Gelman, Bill Simmons, and others about the history and legacy of the Sloan Conference and the revolution it brought to sports. I'm Kirk Goldsberry, and this is Dorkapalooza, or How the Nerds Won. Our story begins in the early aughts, back in the time of dial-up internet, primitive web browsers, and random websites that challenged sports dorks to start thinking about athletes in new ways.
I even remember I used to play whatifsports.com in the early 2000s, which was this computer simulation game. And you could kind of see the computer favoring OBP and whip, just these things that the old school motto of wins and losses and RBI and homers, something was shifting.
I was working a lot on baseball data because there wasn't any basketball data. If you wanted to work on sports analytics in the 80s, it was baseball. That was the only game in town.
It was bleak, but 82games.com, Roland Beach was throwing stuff out there, but it wasn't comprehensive. I mean, I remember when clutch data came available on NBA.com being oh my God, this is a whole new subset of data. It was there and people were trying, but it was bleak.
Those early quants set the stage for the most important sports book of the 21st century. Perhaps you've heard of it, Moneyball by Michael Lewis. It was a blockbuster and a literal game changer. It told the story of how the Oakland Athletics used analytics to identify undervalued players. It was a shot across the bow of conventional wisdom, and the old school heads did not all love it.
The book came out and created a shitstorm. I mean, it was incredibly controversial. People were really, really angry. I mean, I've written books that made people angry for different reasons. This is, I think, the close to the angriest. It probably was the angriest.
Michael Lewis writing that book so that people who own teams say this is a different way we can do things was really important.
Back then, Daryl was no Elvis. In the early 2000s, he was just another MBA who just got his foot in the door with the pro sports team, working in various roles for the Boston Celtics. And the stuff in Lewis's book spoke to Daryl, who had grown up obsessing over Bill James, sabermetrics, and the book James published each year.
I was lucky enough to get a job answering the phones for Bill James Fantasy Baseball. I was lucky enough in their very first basketball analytics book, they threw it to the intern. They said, hey, intern, you go work on this project, see if you can look at point differential and how it affects the NBA. So that was my very first analytics project, which is in the 93 basketball scoreboard, yeah. I remember coming up, like literally worked on it 24/7 because I was like, this is my moment to try and prove something to Bill James, who by the way didn't care at all when I did it. He probably thought it was derivative because it sort of was, but it took a while to come up with the idea of modifying the exponent. That was obviously the first time Bill's ideas were adapted to basketball.
He's a little out there as an MIT guy. At some point, you could feel the Moneyball revolution was going to trickle into other sports. And I remember telling him, like, I think you're going to get a GM job one day. And he was like, no way. And the Celtics people were like, no way.
While Daryl was working for the Celtics, he was also teaching a class at MIT with his friend Jessica Gelman, who worked for the New England Patriots. She also had an analytics background.
I always find women remember the start of relationships better, so I'm going to turn to her.
I mean, I just remember that Daryl, he obviously thinks very differently. And I just enjoyed talking basketball with him. But then also, he is, in the best possible way, I'll say this, a collector of people and like people. No, but in a good way. Like he finds the people that he likes and he holds them close. And so I joined his fantasy football league. And I'm still in it. I've won it twice, including this past year.
But just as their analytics course was getting off the ground, Daryl caught the attention of Houston Rockets owner Leslie Alexander. And Daryl wouldn't be in Boston much longer.
He's reading Moneyball, and he's saying, look, we need to change what we're doing and run our franchise in an innovative way. Between his own ideas and reading Moneyball, he's like, I got to go find someone who is native to understanding data.
When he told me about the Houston Rockets and knowing what I knew about Les Alexander as a hedge fund data wonk, this is someone who's going to get and understand that there's information that's not known that can be created that will give competitive advantage.
Morey went to work for the Rockets in 2006 and eventually became their GM. But his and Jess's work at MIT wasn't done.
A couple months later, we were at the Women's Final Four, and it was in Boston. And after the game, we were sitting in a bar, just chitter-chattering, and Daryl says, okay, so we'll still teach the class. I'll fly up every other week from Houston. Boston to Houston is not really a commutable trip. So, I said to him, I don't know if that's going to be feasible. And he says, well, what do you think we should do? A few months later, Daryl called me and he said, I've been thinking about that conference idea, and I really think we should do it. And I think we should have the students from the class help us.
They dubbed it the MIT Sloan Sports Business Conference. The word analytics wasn't mainstream enough yet to put into the title.
We pulled the first conference together in about 3 months. It was a small group of people that were actually even thinking about analytics in this way. We brought food in from COSI, and it probably cost like $200 for the 120 people that we hosted, and we had a cocktail reception that was like, boxed wine or something equivalent. The first real analytics panel was Sam Presti, Daryl Morey, and Bill James.
Sam's going to mostly not want this to come out because he's sort of a secret nerd that no one wants to talk about. So
I think that really highlights the intimacy of analytics and the people who were interested in analytics at that time.
That first Sloan meeting laid the groundwork for what would come. They turned it into an annual event and added the word analytics to the title. Within a few years, it became the Super Bowl for sports nerds.
I would have stacks of papers from the Sloan conference every year, and I would try to read as many of them on the Amtrak there or on the Amtrak back, and I kept them. I still probably have some in my desk because there was just like, I felt like I had to sit with all of this information. Like things were changing so fast that I could barely keep up with it.
So I came up with Dorkapalooza and wrote this piece about why I loved it, why I thought it was the future of everything. I think I had a joke in there. I haven't read that piece in a while, but there was a joke about possible panic topics, like how to talk to a girl. Like I was having fun with it. I was always looking for ideas that you could read in a dentist's office or on the internet.
Bill won't say it, so I will. In 2009, he was the biggest sports writer on the planet. His decision to write about Sloan was how many people, including me, found out about the conference in the first place. It's also how we all learned a new nickname for Daryl.
Bill famously coined the conference name of Dorkapalooza. Sadly, then called me Dork Elvis, which has stuck with me and is a little frustrating nickname because you don't get to pick your nickname. So, yeah, I get picked on. But Bill's early support was critical to the conference taking off.
Around the time that Sloan is taking off and Dork Elvis is making a name for himself as a GM, he connects with the guy who helped mainstream the stats revolution in baseball.
This is what happens. I write Moneyball. The owner of the Houston Rockets reads Moneyball. He wants to go find his Billy Bean. He winds up finding Daryl. Daryl, at some point, not long after he got his job, reaches out to me and says, I just want to thank you because your book is the reason I have my job. I was taken by just how the whole approach to decision-making in sports was changing on the back end of the book. It's going to change anyway, but the book sort of accelerated it. Baseball, it's pretty easy. They just weren't doing it. Basketball, it's really hard, and they were doing it in the ways that highlighted certain skills but not other skills. And conversely, there were all these things people could do that didn't get registered that were really valuable. Daryl gets in touch with me and we start talking about this. And I asked him for an example of, like, the best example in the league of effectively the no stats all-star. Like, who is really, and he said, we just traded for him.
Lewis decided to write a piece on this quote-unquote no stats all-star, Shane Battier, who, by the way, was confused about what the Moneyball guy wanted with him.
It was weird at first, because I'm like, why does this guy want to write about me? Like, I averaged 10 points a game. And Michael kept trying to, like, ask me all these questions of, like, how I thought and try to get into, like, the minutia of, like, why I made a decision. I'm like, I don't know. It's a loose ball, so I dove for it. What I thought that I did was not a big deal. When the piece came out, I'll never forget this, it was on All-Star break. I had a BlackBerry and I was like reading them on my BlackBerry, that long article. I was really proud. Even though the title No Stat All-Stars, it's a great backhanded compliment, I really wore it as a badge of honor.
Michael Lewis's piece was published on February 13th, 2009, and immediately became a fascination for basketball nerds.
I remember loving reading it at the time because he had such great access. He's sitting with Daryl Morey at games, he's sitting with Sam Hinkie at games, and they're watching Shane Battier do the things that make him a no stats all-star.
It was a great article, but did Daryl give too many secrets away?
The funniest thing was Daryl blew it because he did that Michael Lewis New York Times piece. He just completely fucked up. And I told him, he can vouch. I told him when it happened, like, what are you doing? You had the secret sauce and you just victory lapped in front of everybody about it. And all you did was make all of these owners that are reading this like, why don't we have this stuff? And you just gave away your advantage. I bet he would do that over again.
I think there's definitely some fuck-upness there, is what I would say. I'm mistaken. Shane Battier is very happy though. Shane gets, I think, like $50,000 a speaking gig because of that article.
The fact that I get hired by, Fortune 100 companies to tell the story of the No Stats All-Star and to be the prophet of process over results, that was not in the none of my bingo card growing up.
Shane Battier, the No Stats All-Star. Bill's Dorkapalooza column. 2009 was already a big year for sports analytics. But that November, the burgeoning movement got a stress test on the biggest show on primetime. On Sunday Night Football, the Patriots' Bill Belichick made a controversial decision to go for it on 4th and 2 late in the game on his own side of the field with the lead. It didn't work. The Patriots ultimately lost, and sports radio hosts had a field day. They laughed and laughed. But the nerds, they circled the wagons.
I think the key moment was the Belichick play. It was the 4th and 2 when they went for it against the Colts and everybody went nuts. And then the nerds came in and was like, it was the right call. And it was like, it definitely wasn't the right call. We didn't get a 4th down. My argument was like, it actually might have been the right call. The play was the wrong call. So you have to be like, yeah, the math said it was actually maybe a good idea. The play was terrible. There's got to be some sort of truth in between.
The failed play ironically helped galvanize the analytics movement, and by then, the teams were catching on. and delegations from the smart ones were starting to show up at Daryl and Jess's nerdy conference. In the early days, people noticed which teams showed up, but by the early 2010s, it was the opposite.
By 2012, 2013, if your team was not represented at Sloan, you were like publicly shamed. Like the Lakers were publicly shamed for not having anybody at Sloan.
But not everyone was a fan.
All these guys who run these organizations who talk about analytics, they have one thing in common. They're a bunch of guys who ain't never played the game, and they never got the girls in high school, and they just want to get in the game. I'm not worried about Daryl Morey. He's one of those idiots who believe in analytics. And listen, I wouldn't know Daryl Morey if he walked in this room right now.
Yeah, probably the most known clip about me out there. So I would say mostly when I heard it, I felt like Charles was right because I didn't get the girls in high school. And yeah, it hurt a little bit. I gotta be frank. I was like, man, Charles is good at what he does. So it's true. We all love sports, and yeah, Charles's way in was getting a lot of rebounds, and my way in was data.
Daryl's reacting to an infamous Charles Barkley rant from inside the NBA. The Hall of Famer was echoing what a lot of people felt at the time.
It's just a crap to some people who were really smart, made up to try to get in the game because they had no talent. Because they had no talent to be able to play.
I agree with you on that,
So smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics.
The most fun era for this was the early 2010s because you want to have a boogeyman, and at that point there was, especially in sports media, there was enough, and old crusty GMs of different teams, there was enough people that were really in the fuck these people mode.
Still, the dorks pushed on. The game kept changing, and a funny thing happened. The debate became one-sided. In the NBA, the inflection point might have been the Grizzlies' 2013 trade of Rudy Gay.
We had enough stats at that point telling us that Rudy Gay was actually not a winning player for that team and that there was a chance they would be better than them. So this was like a really important moment for the nerds because we were telling you that they would actually might be better off without Rudy Gay. And I always remember that as like this kind of swing thing.
At the March 2013 conference, one attendee wore a t-shirt bearing the salaries of the most overpaid and underpaid players in the NBA. You'll notice Rudy's name in the first category. But look at the underpaid list, and you'll see a pre-superstar version of James Harden, a youngster that Daryl had traded for just a few months earlier.
Not to suck up to Daryl, who I love making fun of as much as I possibly can, but him having a really successful GM career was important. Like, he was kind of the litmus test for all this stuff.
That's how you become Dork Elvis. But Daryl wasn't the only one to get the celebrity treatment at Sloan.
So something funny happens with Sloan, where all of a sudden these people are like rock stars, and they were like the most unlikely people to ever be rock stars. But these were like massive people in their fields, right? So we would have 2,000 people at Sloan, and somebody like Dean Oliver, who the average person would know, was like an important person to be there. It was like you're at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and it's like there's Paul McCartney.
I compare it to Metallica's Black Album, like once they crossed over.
I remember there was this one, it was like the height of Sloan when it really felt the biggest it's ever been, and there was a big football metrics panel that I happened to be in there for the beginning of. And Aaron Schatz came in, and he came and he sat in the stage, and he had his hair in a ponytail. And he sat down and he pulled the rubber band out of his hair and he dramatically did this thing. Like he was like a celebrity. I thought it was like the funniest thing. I was like, this guy's really feeling it. He's really feeling the moment right now. But it was like the kind of thing I loved about Sloan, like the comedy that came with Sloan combined with like actually learning stuff about advanced metrics in sports and trends.
Believe it or not, this is kind of what happened to me.
It was 2011. I was a geography professor at Harvard College. I'd never written a word about sports in my entire life. And I saw an opportunity to study a random idea I'd had since I was a young basketball player. As a basketball player, I'd noticed I was a much better shooter in some places than others. I could hit fadeaways off the left block better than I could off of the right block. This frustrated me, but as a map maker, it intrigued me too. In the NBA back then, you'd watch Dirk or Kobe get to certain spots and be lethal. You'd watch LaMarcus Aldridge post up almost exclusively on the left side. Even role players like Brandon Bass had their sweet spots too. This is common knowledge among people who have played even a little bit of pickup. But as I got older and more into cartography, I wondered why nobody had ever mapped this crucial effect out. Then I had the idea that would change my life forever. What if I mapped out NBA shooting data? Could I use basic map making to help players, teams, and fans better understand the vital spatial effects that made Kobe different than Dirk and Nash different from Kidd? Every year, NBA players combine to take about 200,000 shots, and when you map them all out on the surface of the court, some huge patterns start to jump off the page. You know, away from the basket, inside the two-point area, the league shoots essentially 40%. And then beyond the arc, we know that three-point shooters make 35% of their threes. When you see these plotted out on a map of a basketball court, you can see why the mid-range shot is a dumb idea. In the fall of 2011, I submitted a paper to Sloan with my findings. It was called Court Vision. I was invited to present at the 2012 conference. This was my Kelly Clarkson moment. I was nervous as shit. I rehearsed for weeks and weeks. This was going to be the biggest presentation of my career. In March of 2012, I took the Red Line down to the conference. I arrived as a geography professor, and I left as a basketball analytics guy. That day changed my life forever. I met Mark Cuban. I met Bill Simmons. I met Zach Lowe. Deadspin asked me to make some charts for their website. I did. By June, I was writing the NBA Finals preview for the dang New York Times. The charts were on the front page of their website for the whole day of Game 1 of the 2012 Finals. Unbeknownst to me, Zach recommended that Bill check out my work and maybe offer me a chance to be an occasional contributor. By fall of 2012, I was working part-time at Grantland. The conference literally changed my career. In 2012, I became a sports writer at ESPN. By 2015, R.C. Buford had hired me to be a vice president in his front office at the Spurs. In 2016, I became the first analytics guy ever for Team USA basketball. And in 2019, I put out my first book about basketball analytics. It became a New York Times bestseller. The conference launched my career, and I was by no means alone in saying that.
There's a lot of people who would never be able to play professionally or in the NBA, but they're getting to be involved and touch it and influence it, in part because of what we built. So that's pretty awesome.
It really opened up sports to a whole different subset of people. People who did not feel that they were included in the sports world. If you didn't play and if you didn't have the cred of a locker room, no one took you seriously. But for the first time, and that was the cool part, no, it was hey, this is for us.
I'm really proud of where we are today, which is, 50% of the speakers are women or diverse. I wouldn't say it's equal men and women who are attending the conference, but we started a mentorship program 6 years ago. We have 75 students each year who come to the conference on us. We have definitely recognized that the Sloan Conference is a platform for us to help broaden, I guess we call the funnel of access. And I think in the early days, it was just who would come, but we're in a time and period where we can engage and market and reach out, and we've been very intentional.
By 2013, Sloan had blazed a new pathway into sports for all kinds of people, and the world noticed, even paper salesmen in Scranton.
So Wade wants to send people to the Sloan conference? We got to compile a list of our target clients. Already on it.
That's right, a sitcom as big as The Office referenced the Sloan Conference. Shout out executive producer and former baseball blogger Mike Schur. But Schur wasn't the only famous fan of the conference.
Okay, so Obama was going to be the keynote speaker, and they chose 200 of us, moderators, panelists, whatever. You get to meet Obama before, I think, he goes on and does his speech. We all lined up, and we had 15 seconds to shake Obama's hand, make small talk, and get a photo taken. I get up there, and he's like, oh, Zach Lowe, 10 things I like and don't like, must read every Friday. And I'm like, he's being coached. There's no way that he knows that I write a column called 10 Things I Like and Don't Like. And then his people were like, no, he actually reads it. And I'm like, I still don't know if I believe it, but I choose to believe it because it's good for my ego.
Obama, The Office, the 3-point revolution. In its first 20 years, Sloan went from fighting for a seat at the table to setting it.
Basketball, I think Sloan was at the forefront of changing every single piece of the sport. How teams were put together, what teams valued in players, and how you played it.
But to borrow a phrase from my boss, Bill, are we sure this is good? The droves of nerds that have taken over operations in NBA front offices have spurred tanking strategies, load management, and an over-reliance on threes. Just because the game is smarter doesn't necessarily mean it's better or more entertaining. The No Stats All-Star piece changed Shane Battier's life, but he also recognizes it changed his game too.
If you look at the amount of 2-point jumpers I took after that article came out, I bet you it cratered. Once I saw what I saw, I couldn't unsee it. And I knew like how bad a 15-foot jumper was. Defensively, it made me a really tough defender, and allowed me to get to all defensive teams. Offensively, it entirely sapped my creativity. And because I knew what was bad.
It's like baseball. A decade after the Moneyball approach helped make the game kind of unwatchable, MLB had to change the rules. Ironically, it was Theo Epstein, a famously analytics-forward GM, who spearheaded the changes. I think it's time for the NBA to consider something similar. I was honestly pretty surprised to find out that Daryl Morey does too.
I was telling the league office they need to fix the three-point problem that was created by all the analysis from the conference, and they were arguing against me. And so it was sort of like a full circle moment where I do think the game is unbalanced. For sure, three is too much for that shot, and there needs to be something to do to help fix the game and address it. I believe something needs to be done. I think it's more urgent than tanking. As much as people talk about the different ways people get to threes, I think that's all true. The reality is 50% more is too much for that shot. We somehow need to address that, yeah.
That's the thing about the analytics movement. It keeps changing, and you never know what's coming next. And who knows what future Sloan conferences could bring. Robotic middle relievers? Cryogenic injury prevention? Biometric shit we can't even fathom?
We're headed toward the Minority Report. That'll be the 50th Sloan Conference will just be all that creepy DNA shit.
We're also making such advances in health that people aren't going to die of natural causes very much over the next 20, 30, 40 years.
And Daryl will probably have figured out how to live until 120.
We're all going to die in this sort of swarms of AI-enabled devices. So.
He called me a couple of years ago and he was like, Terminator, it's real.
Yeah, it's happening, yeah. Just enjoy every day.
This month, the nerds will descend on Boston for the 20th time. There will be a lot of discussions about the future of sports. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but we do know one thing. Analytics are everywhere now. On your phone, in your car, in your house, and of course, in the games that we love to watch. Sorry, Chuck, the dorks have won.